Hello, SpongeX here. Before I get started on the review, I just want to say that I have been going through a lot of depressing stuff lately. I lost my job, I lost my apartment, and I had to move back in with my parents. I have been incredibly depressed and unmotivated to make art, play video games, and especially seek out another job. I've been feeling very worthless. However, there is one thing that was able to push me through these tough times, and that is the beautiful work of Studio Ghibli. I'm honestly not a fan of anime, but Studio Ghibli, their movies are phenomenal. They have some of the most gorgeous hand drawn visuals, some of the most emotional and powerful original scores I've ever heard, usually thanks to the wonderful Joe Hisaishi. I cry whenever I watch these movies. Hayao Miyazaki directed most of the studio's most successful films, and he still refuses to quit animating, despite retiring multiple times between 1997 to 2024. He claimed that last year's The Boy and the Heron would be his last film, but it was confirmed about a month ago he's back at it again, working on a new action-adventure film that harkens back to his earliest works. I'm kind of glad to hear that, because I honestly thought some of his earliest works were the best. I honestly wasn't a big fan of The Boy and the Heron. It pains me to say that, but I found it too confusing and boring. The only things about it that I really liked were I thought the Heron, voiced by Robert Pattinson, was very goofy, and it was shocking to find out who voiced him because it sounds nothing like Robert Pattinson. And I thought the threatening giant parrots were hilariously derpy. I had a lot of fun with those characters, but I watched a lot of reviews that went into great detail to break down the film's hidden meanings and all that, and it helped me understand the movie a little better, but it still doesn't change my opinion. I still think it's a very flawed story. It felt more like a film made specifically for Miyazaki himself, and not for his fans or filmgoers. So instead of talking about a Ghibli film I didn't like, I want to talk about the top 10 Ghibli films I absolutely adore. These films got me through very tough times, and I feel like I owe this studio my feedback and my life on why I love these classics, and why others should seek these movies out if they haven't already. This review will be torture to make, though, because there's a lot of footage and music I wish I could show off in this review to show and explain people why these movies are so good. But, there's a thing called copyright, and so this review may contain spoilers, so there's your warning. Also, I'm only going to be reviewing the English dubs of these. I honestly tried watching the Japanese sub versions, and I'm sorry, I couldn't get through them. I strongly prefer the English voices instead. I honestly think they give a more emotional performance. I don't know why, but usually when I try watching Japanese dubs, it just sounds like they're reading off the script. It doesn't sound like they're really putting emotion into it. And Disney, man, they really got some really good voice actors for these English localizations. So starting off with number 10, The Secret World of Arrietty, based on a book called The Borrowers. The film centers on a tiny girl named Arrietty, along with her mom and dad, who live under the floorboards of a great aunt's house. The great aunt is taking in her great-grandson, Sean, who seems to be sick and needs to stay in bed. Arrietty's mom is voiced by Amy Poehler from Saturday Night Live, who many Disney fans may recognize as Joy from Inside Out. Her husband in the film, oddly enough, is voiced by her real-life ex-husband, Will Arnett, who many may recognize as Lego Batman or BoJack Horseman. One thing worth mentioning is that unlike most anime dubs, Disney did a real good job at getting well-known and very talented voice actors to play these roles. I'll even dare say they outperform the original Japanese voices. I definitely noticed a drop in voice quality ever since Disney foolishly dropped the distribution rights for Studio Ghibli. It really is a shame. Their new distributors are called G-Kids, and admittedly, they do a better job at exposing these films compared to Disney. Not only did they do a better job at reprinting Blu-ray and DVD copies for these films and putting them on store shelves, but they even got the rights to add these to streaming services like Max and Netflix, depending on what region you live in. So I remembered both Secret World of Arrietty and Ponyo being the only Studio Ghibli films that Disney bothered heavily promoting, even advertising them on Disney Channel, something they never bothered doing for Spirited Away, the movie that actually won an Oscar. I did want to see this movie in theaters back when it first came out, but I still lived with my parents, and I knew they wouldn't want to see a movie like this, so I was eventually able to see it when the premium channel Stars debuted the film. So Arrietty is finally old enough to join her dad in what's called a borrowing mission, where they adventure across the house, like it's a big, dangerous adventure in order to bring back things they need to survive, like sugar cubes. The scene does go on for quite a bit, but I really love the attention to detail and the way these tiny characters navigate through this huge world, with the dad being the more experienced one, while Arrietty is the inexperienced yet eager one. I've always had a soft spot for media revolving around tiny characters trying to survive a giant world, whether it's Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Ant-Man, or even the video games of the Pikmin series. The number one rule of being a borrower is to never get caught, never let their species be discovered, otherwise it endangers their entire lives. But Shaw discovers Arrietty and tries assuring her that there's nothing to be afraid of. Arrietty doesn't answer back to Shaw and goes back home with her dad, feeling like a failure for exposing her family's existence. Later in the movie, Arrietty's dad gets saved by another borrower named Spiller, who informs the family of a safer place where other borrowers live. Arrietty is excited to learn that there's others like her out there, and she can't wait to meet them. Shaw tries helping the borrowers by taking pieces of his great-aunt's dollhouse to spruce up the borrower's kitchen. While the mom adores the new kitchen and ware, the father doesn't trust this and decides they need to move out along with Spiller. Arrietty tells Shawn that they're leaving in order to survive. Shaw tries talking to Arrietty about life and death. Arrietty gets offended, thinking he was telling her that she's gonna die. Shaw apologizes for accidentally offending her, and in a shocking reveal, he tells her that he's actually the one who's dying, for he has a heart condition, and he doesn't have faith that he'll make it through the recovery. And Arrietty feels sad to hear that. Meanwhile, the great-aunt's maid, Haru, finds Arrietty's mom and captures her in a jar. In the English dub, Carol Burnett voices Haru, which some may recognize as the kangaroo from Horton Hears a Who. The crazy thing about Haru is that in any other movie, if someone discovered a tiny person, they'd probably try exploiting their discovery for money, but Haru, she sees the little people as little vermin thieves, and she calls an exterminator to get rid of these little people. Shawn tries distracting Haru so Arrietty can free her mom in the background. Arrietty succeeds as she and her family race off to sail away on a tea kettle to their new home. Shawn races after Arrietty to say goodbye to her. We get a touching scene of Arrietty tearing up as she leans her head against his finger, and she feels sorry for not trusting him before. She also fears what will happen to him due to his heart condition, but Shaw says thanks to meeting her, he thinks that he'll live, because meeting her gave him the strength and courage to keep on living. As Arrietty sails away, Spiller tries comforting Arrietty by offering her some food. Overall, it's a very bittersweet movie with very creative visuals. I wouldn't call it a standout movie, or I wouldn't call it the absolute greatest movie ever, but it's still worth checking out. Number 9. The Cat Returns. A lot of you are probably thinking, really? The Cat Returns? You consider this to be one of the top 10 greatest Studio Ghibli films? I mean, it's not the most exciting or mind-blowing Studio Ghibli film, but to me, it's the silliest and funniest out of the entire library. Its art style is pretty different too. It definitely resembles an anime art style, but not necessarily the one from Ghibli. It's the only Studio Ghibli film to be a spin-off of a previous Ghibli film, that being Whisper of the Heart. The film stars Anne Hathaway as Haru, a shy and awkward schoolgirl. One day she saves a cat from being run over by a truck. The cat surprisingly stands up on 2 legs and thanks her for the save. Haru comically keeps getting all these overwhelming loads of cat gifts from the cat that she saved. And the cat she saved, it turns out to be the prince of a cat kingdom, and he wants Haru to marry him. Haru doesn't know how to respond, and the prince takes her response as a yes. A large cat named Muta takes Haru to a well-suited cat named the Baron, voiced by Cary Elwes from Robin Hood Men in Tights. The Baron was a fictional character based on a cat statue from the movie Whisper of the Heart, which is why this movie counts as a spin-off. Weird to give a spin-off a name that implies that it's a sequel. Maybe the film's title was supposed to be a parody on the book title The Cat in the Hat Returns or something. I don't know. The Baron and Muta try protecting Haru from an army of cats who are after Haru, but Haru and Muta get captured by the cats, and Baron sets off to save them from the Cat Kingdom. Haru is turned into a cat-human hybrid. The Baron fights his way through many cat soldiers to free Haru and return her home and restore her back to her human form. The movie is overall just a real fun and hilarious time. The voice actors in this are all fantastic. I especially like Tim Curry as the villainous King Cat. There's not much more to say. It's very different from other Studio Ghibli films, but it's one I'd put on the most if I wanted a good laugh from the studio. Number 8, Kiki's Delivery Service. I honestly have this movie to thank for introducing me to Studio Ghibli in the first place. This was one of the first films that Disney acquired to make an English dub out of, and I remember the preview for this film being shown on the VHS for The Spirit of Mickey. I didn't know what to think of it as a kid, but I thought it looked interesting. It was very different from other movies I've seen. Too bad the preview pretty much spoiled a huge chunk of the film. Not only was this the first one I was introduced to, but it was also the first one I ever saw, since it was the only Studio Ghibli film to ever be shown on the Disney Channel. I remember tuning into it once, and I thought it was actually pretty good. Sad I never got to see it all the way through, though, but I saw most of it, though. The movie has a very decent voice cast, including Kirsten Dunst from Spider-Man as Kiki herself, and the late Phil Hartman as her comical talking sidekick, Gigi the cat. Interesting how Dunst and Hartman would go on to star in one last film together in the movie Small Soldiers, which was sadly the last movie that Phil Hartman was in before his tragic murder. Gigi was my favorite character of the movie. His voice lines and actions were hilarious. He also seems to be one of the most popular Studio Ghibli characters when it comes to Japan, because, have you seen, like, the merchandise they sell there? Most of it contains Gigi, Totoro, and Calcifer. The movie stars a cute 13-year-old witch named Kiki, who adventures off to live on her own. We see her say farewell to her parents as she flies off on her broom to find a new home, along with her best friend Gigi the cat. She settles in a seemingly Italian town, and she gets into a bit of trouble with the law for recklessly flying around, and she manages to run away thanks to a boy named Tombo. Tombo is fascinated to see a real-life witch, and he tries befriending her, but Kiki acts a little stuck up and avoids him. A bakery woman, voiced by Tress MacNeille, is sad that a customer dropped their baby's binky, and Kiki offers to fly it over to the customer. The baker is amazed by Kiki and offers to hire Kiki to be her delivery girl. So she not only offers her a job, but she even offers her a place to live in a room above the bakery. Kiki is thrilled and excited to move in with the baker and her husband. During Kiki's first day of delivery, she is tasked to take a stuffed cat that strongly resembles Gigi to a little boy for his birthday. So Kiki botches up the delivery when a gust of wind blows her into a tree with very territorial crows that attack her and chase her away. Kiki realizes that she dropped the cat plush back in the forest and has no choice but to have Gigi pose as the plush cat until she can find the plush and swap it out before anyone notices. There is some funny tension with Gigi having to pretend to be a toy, only for him to get terrified when a big dog approaches him. It is really cute how the dog is actually protective of Gigi, causing Gigi to warm up to the dog, and he even calls him a good dog later on. Kiki eventually finds that the plush cat was found by an artist named Ursula. Kiki explains the situation to Ursula, and gets upset to find out that the whole fiasco with the crows caused the plush to get torn up. Ursula offers to fix up the plush and return it to Kiki if she cleans up her place. With the deal made, Kiki manages to swap the plush out with Gigi, leaving their first delivery to be barely accomplished. The next day, Tombo invites Kiki to go to an aviation club meeting. Kiki decides that she'll go, but she has to make a delivery first. She helps two friendly old ladies bake some goodies for one of the ladies' granddaughters. We see the three had a really good time making all this stuff, which only makes the following scene more heartbreaking. Kiki gets caught up in a rainstorm, but she manages to make it to the granddaughter's house, although she is a bit late. Only for the granddaughter to be very ungrateful. She doesn't even care about the baked goods that her grandma made, and she insults Kiki for her terrible service. The scene honestly breaks my heart, and it brings haunting flashbacks to how terribly I've been treated with my past jobs, despite how I really tried hard. She ends up missing Tombo's club meeting and gets sick from the rain. After she recovers, she meets up with Tombo to apologize. He shows her a modified bike he made that has a big plane propeller attached to the front. Kiki rides on the back with him to test it out, and they go for a wild ride and end up crashing. After surviving such a disastrous ride, Kiki just can't help but break into adorable laughter as Tombo joins in with her. Tombo's friends show up, and Kiki gets uncomfortable around them and abruptly leaves, leaving Tombo to feel upset. I gotta admit, though, that as much as I like Kiki as a character, I do feel bad for Tombo in a lot of scenes. I felt like Kiki was a little too harsh on him over stuff he didn't even do. The harsh cruelties of life and work get to Kiki, making her feel depressed, and this depression somehow leads to Kiki losing her witch powers. She suddenly can't understand Gigi anymore, and she can't fly anymore. Kiki feels worthless without her powers and sinks into a deeper depression. Ursula checks in on Kiki and invites her over to her place. Ursula tries cheering Kiki up by telling her that she has a pretty face and she wants to use her as a model for her next painting. Throughout the movie, we've seen Kiki thinking pretty poorly of herself. Like, she doesn't think she's that pretty. She thinks the only dress she owns is very ugly, and so it's flattering to see Kiki warm up to someone complimenting her appearance. Kiki tries explaining her self-doubts and lack of motivation, which Ursula compares her situation to artist block, and she inspires Kiki to look for a new purpose to break out of her funk. As one who suffers through depression and artist block, I really can relate with this scene. In the final act, a freak accident causes a big blimp to crash onto a building. Tombo tries helping the others and tying the aircraft to the ground, but the wind picks him up and he's stuck hanging onto a rope as the blimp flies away. Kiki sees all of this happening on live TV, and she desperately tries regaining her passion and motivation so she can fly off and save him. Her flight is very rough and bumpy, but she finally manages to get off the ground, and as she desperately tries grabbing Tombo's hand, but she keeps missing. Tombo finally loses his grip as Kiki heroically dives down and saves him at the last minute, and the town cheers over Kiki's heroics. This is overall a very cute movie. It is a very simple slice-of-life story, basically summing up how life and work sucks, but it tries encouraging viewers to do their best. It delves into very relatable subjects like self-doubt, work fatigue, and dealing with rude and ungrateful people. It makes me wish that I could regain my confidence just like Kiki did and find out where I belong in life. Despite its fantasy elements with Kiki and her powers, it's a very grounded and lifelike movie, showing people just living their everyday lives. Some people might find this movie boring, but I found it very charming overall. Number 7. The Wind Rises. This was originally set to be Miyazaki's last film back in 2013, before he came out of retirement. This was one of the last films Disney distributed for Ghibli, though they released it under their Touchstone license due to being concerned about the movie's subject matter. It seems like this is the movie that broke up Disney's rocky partnership with Ghibli. Again, it's a shame because there were a lot of crew members on the Disney team who loved Studio Ghibli and were proud to bring this to English audiences, but the higher-ups at Disney just never saw or understood the studio's potential or work. While most Studio Ghibli films are made for family audiences, this one is one of the few to be made for adults. It has a PG-13 rating. Now, this film could easily have been made in live action, but they put the dedication into animating everything, and you gotta respect that dedication. I honestly think this movie serves as a better farewell to Miyazaki's career compared to The Boy and the Heron, but Miyazaki considers The Boy and the Heron his most personal work. However, this film setting may throw off some older viewers, especially if they're war veterans, because it does have some touchy subject matter. The movie takes place during the events of World War II. From Japan's side, with a plot like that, it's safe to assume that USA war veterans would find a setting like that too taboo to watch. Despite its sensitive setting, it's a very good movie, but it's a very sad one. It opens up with a boy from Japan named Jiro, dreaming of one day being able to fly airplanes, but he knows he'll never be able to due to having poor eyesight. He has a dream where he meets his idol, an Italian aircraftsman named Caproni. Caproni inspires Jiro that if he can't fly planes, he can build them. Years later, Jiro is now all grown up and voiced by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who many Disney fans will recognize as Treasure Planet's Jim Hawkins and Jiminy Cricket from the awful Pinocchio reboot. Jiro is heading back home on a train after spending time studying to become a plane engineer. He meets a young girl named Nahoko, who knows a French poem he loves. The Great Kanto earthquake occurs as everyone has to flee from the train. Jiro helps rescue Nahoko's maid as she is hurt from the aftermath, and Jiro returns Nahoko and her maid back to their family as Jiro heads off before the family could even learn his name. Cut to 1925, where Jiro and his best friend Kiro are employed to build fighter planes for the Japanese army. Throughout the movie, we see how Jiro is kind of conflicted by this. He just wants to build beautiful airplanes that can fly through the air, yet they're being wasted on warfare for a war he has no faith in. He finds it a shame that all of his hard work is just going to end in destruction. There's an interesting part late in the movie where Jiro and Kuro feel no guilt on how the army will use their planes. They're not building planes for the sake of bombing other countries. They're just living their dream of building planes. Jiro has a hilarious short and grouchy boss named Kirokawa, played hilariously by Martin Short. He was honestly one of my favorite characters in the movie. He's one of those characters who starts off very harsh and kind of unlikable, but he softens up over the course of the film. And I always love characters like that in films. After many failed flight designs, Jiro takes a vacation at a resort. There he meets a woman painting outside. On a windy day, her parasol flies away, and Jiro catches it and returns it to her. The girl feels sad for not getting a chance to thank him, But her dad, who owns the hotel resort, tells her not to worry, for he's staying at their hotel and she can thank him there. Later on, Jiro meets the painter girl again, and it's revealed that the girl is Nahoko, the same little girl he helped during the earthquake years ago, voiced by Emily Blunt from Mary Poppins Returns. Admittedly, it's kind of jarring how these two end up falling in love with each other. I mean, it's never confirmed how old Nahoko is now, but it's still kind of jarring because you remember her being a little girl earlier in the movie. But admittedly, their romance is the heart and soul of this movie. She fell in love with him ever since he first saved her and her maid, and Jiro starts to fall for her as well. Jiro meets with a friendly German spy named Hans Castorp, who gives Jiro intel against Hitler and how Germany and the Japanese army will eventually fall. Hans is another great character in this movie. He's not in it for very long, but we see him smile upon seeing the romance between Jiro and Nahoko as they bond by throwing a paper airplane back and forth. It's one of the most entertaining scenes in the whole movie. Jiro then asks for permission to marry Nahoko. Nahoko accepts but warns him that she has tuberculosis and wants to recover before they get married. This reveal honestly hurts upon rewatching it because when I first saw this movie years ago, I never heard of that disease, and so I didn't know what it really was. But about 2 years ago, I learned that my grandma got the exact same disease, and so upon rewatching this movie, I realized, oh my god, this is what my grandma had. And sadly, my grandma got the disease supposedly from years of working as a nurse in her past. Luckily, my grandma is still alive and with us. It does make this movie a bit sadder knowing more about this disease. Hans had to make an abrupt exit, for secret police are after him for his intel on Hitler, supposedly, and the police are also after Jiro, supposedly for being a witness of the intel. Kirokawa wants Jiro to stay with him at his and his wife's house to hide him. Later, we get a shocking scene where Jiro gets a phone call at work from Kirokawa as he passes on a message about Nahoko and how she suffered from a lung hemorrhage. Jiro quickly rushes out of work, bringing it with him, and as he cries over it as he rides a train to her. He tries sending Nahoko to a sanitarium so she can get healed up, but she can't bear to be without Jiro, and she manages to follow him back to Kirokawa's house. Jiro begs Kirokawa to let Nahoko live with him and his wife. The wife thinks it sounds like a splendid idea, but Kirokawa refuses to let an unwed couple live in his house. So Jiro begs his boss and wife to be witnesses for their own wedding and have it set immediately. The wife accepts, as her husband begrudgingly accepts. We are led to a beautiful wedding scene that even Kirokawa breaks into tears over. Sometime later, Jiro comes home forgetting that his sister Kaio was visiting, and she's voiced by Mae Whitman, who many may recognize as the voice of Katara from the original Avatar: The Last Airbender. Kaio pursued a successful career as a nurse, and she expresses her disappointment and concern over Jiro leaving Nahoko alone at home while he spends his time at work. She informs him that Nahoko's condition is worse than he realizes, and she doesn't want to see Nahoko die because she grew to really like her. Despite this, we see how Jiro is still a very dedicated husband. While he is working all the time, he makes sure to spend time with his wife at the same time. He even holds her hand while he's working. It's a very touching scene. Now here's where the movie gets really sad. So one morning, as Jiro heads off to work to test off his latest plane model, Nahoko happily waves him goodbye, but slowly begins to frown, and she leaves notes for Jiro, his sister, and her family. Kaio comes back in shock to see that Nahoko left, and she reads the letter, finding out that Nahoko is heading back to the sanitarium as she breaks into tears. This dang ending gets me every time. We cut to Jiro, and his test flight is a success. The wind rises and distracts Jiro as he turns towards the wind, ignoring his plane's successful flight and ignoring the cheering of his co-workers. That rise of wind felt like a call to Jiro that Nahoko died. In a bittersweet ending, we cut to 1945. We see Jiro once again dreaming alongside Caproni. We see a graveyard full of destroyed Japanese aircrafts, signifying Japan's defeat in World War II. Jiro reflects on his regret of all of his planes being used for such destruction, for a war they were never even going to win. His biggest regret is losing his wife, as he sees her spirit telling him that he must live on. Jiro breaks into tears and keeps thanking her. My god, this is such a sad but beautiful film. I don't think the film will be for everyone. Some may get lost or bored by the movie, but it is an interesting insight on the making of airplanes. The movie may be a fictional story based on a real-life plane engineer from a real-life war setting, but Jiro really reflects the life of Miyazaki, from his fascination with airplanes, his hatred of war, losing his mother to tuberculosis, and even his regret of choosing his work over spending more time with his wife and son. I personally found this to be a better swan song to his career, and found The Boy and the Heron to be underwhelming in comparison. But hey, the man never quits, and I can only hope that his real last film will be his greatest. Number 6, Whisper of the Heart. Funny thing is how the first thing I think of when I hear a Western song like Country Road, the first thing I think of is a film from Japan. Yep, I mentioned this one earlier with its spin-off The Cat Returns. Well, here's the movie that led to that spin-off. While Whisper of the Heart isn't my all-time favorite Studio Ghibli film, I do find it to be the most relatable. I believe this is one of my best friend's favorite Studio Ghibli films as well. Similar to Kiki's Delivery Service, this is a very laid-back and very realistic movie for the most part. It's probably one of their most realistic films. It's very relatable and has very likable characters, and as a Kingdom Hearts fan, I can't help but smile upon realizing that the two main characters are the voices of Namine and Riku, with Pitch Perfect's Brittany Snow as Shizuku and David Gallagher as Seiji. Just close your eyes when you hear these two talk, and it sounds like a weird Kingdom Hearts romance fan fiction.
You've got my book.
Oh, this is yours, is it?
The story revolves around a middle schooler named Shizuku, as she's about to graduate middle school, and she doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. She's a huge bookworm and notices that a guy named Seiji has checked out every book she likes from the library before she did. And she begins wondering who Seiji is and if he would think a lot like her. We see her meet up with her friend at school named Mako, voiced by former Disney Channel actress Ashley Tisdale. Shizuku shows her the song she wrote for the graduation ceremony, being a personal rewriting of the song Country Roads. It's worth noting that in the original Japanese version, it was more about Shizuku localizing the song to be more culturally appropriate, and she named it Concrete Road. Shizuku realized that she left her song behind, and as she goes back to get it, she finds a boy reading it. He hands it back to her and teases her that her version is just as corny as the original. Throughout the movie, we see Shizuku's friends and teachers complimenting her for being a great writer, but Shizuku has doubts in herself, and she sees her writing as corny and flawed. Being bored of her life, Shizuku finds a strange cat on a bus and follows it, very similar to Alice chasing the white rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. Nahoko chases the cat, hoping for the chase to add some excitement to her life, only for the cat to lead her to an old antique shop. I really do think the antique shop is the heart and soul behind this entire movie. At first, Shizuku seems bummed out and bored that the cat led her to such a boring old antique shop, but then she takes a look inside and she's fascinated by the stuff in there, especially a statue of a cat in a white suit. The old owner of the shop named Shiro comes in and welcomes her to look around. He introduces her to many of the antiques and shows how there's many wonderful stories behind them. There's an interesting scene where Shiro shows Shizuku this giant clock, tells how there's like a fairy tale behind the artwork in it, and it's a pretty interesting scene. So when Shiro shows her the cat statue, he tells her how there's a love story behind the cat, saying how his name is the Baron and he's waiting for the return of his lost love. Shizuku is fascinated about the idea of stories being told through just objects instead of storybooks, and we get a conflict where Mako is heartbroken because there's a classmate she has a crush on, but she's embarrassed and heartbroken when he asks if she will go out with his friend instead. Shizuku angrily confronts the boy for breaking her friend's heart, but is put in an awkward situation where the boy confesses that he loves her. Now, Shizuku admits that she likes him as a friend, but she refuses to go out with him because Mako is her best friend, and she doesn't want to ruin anything between them. So the boy understands and reluctantly promises to never bring it up. Now, this scene could have easily been cut out of the movie and made the movie shorter without any context being changed, but I am kind of glad that this is in the film. I absolutely hate love triangle stories, and I think they can teach kids terrible lessons about toxic relationships, so I do salute this movie for making Shizuku a loyal friend to both Mako and the boy. I would have rolled my eyes if she ended up kissing the boy, only for an ugly fight to break out later between her and Mako. This movie spares the audience from having to suffer through such misery, and it leaves us with a very tough yet mature way of handling such an uncomfortable conflict. Shizuku feels like a jerk, for she is calling the boy a clueless jerk for not realizing Mako had feelings, but she realizes that she's the jerk for not realizing the boy liked her. She tries revisiting the antique shop, but is bummed to find out that it's closed. She notices the clock and the Baron statue are missing. The boy who teased her song earlier shows up, and it's revealed that he is the grandson of the shop owner. He offers to let her in to see the Baron, revealing it was moved upstairs. He also reveals the big clock was sold because it was only there for repairs. He says his grandpa is out with his friends and they won't be back till later. As he takes her to see the Baron, he shows her a cool trick with its eyes, where when light shines on it, it creates like a really cool glowing effect. Shizuku notices a bunch of violins, and she learns that the boy made one of them, and he reveals that he wants to make violins for a living. In what is arguably the best part of the movie, Shizuku asks him to play the violin, but he only agrees to do it if she sings. She doesn't want to, she's very nervous, she doesn't think she'll be any good, but he starts playing a song that he knows she'll understand, and he starts playing Country Roads as Shizuku awkwardly starts singing her version of the song, only to fully get into it as she starts smiling and clapping along as she keeps singing. And to add to the cuteness of the scene, Shiro and his friends come back and they hear the music coming from upstairs. Now, instead of awkwardly interrupting the performance, they grab their instruments and just join along. It's a very heartwarming scene as Shizuku just keeps on singing, feeling more confidence with her friends around her and supporting her. And the scene always puts a big smile on my face. It's just a really wholesome scene. Right after the performance, Shizuku is shocked to find out that the boy's name is Seiji, the one who checked out all of the books that she loves, and she can't believe it, and she's in denial. Seiji walks her home as she apologizes for her reaction upon finding out his name, and she admits that she had a real good time. She thinks that his grandpa and his friends are really nice guys. So Seiji apologizes for what he said about her Country Road song, and he confesses that he thinks that she's a very talented writer, and she should keep it up. Some time passes, and Seiji asks to speak with Shizuku alone on the school roof, with all the other kids comically snooping in on their conversation. Seiji reveals he has a chance to study with a violin maker in Italy for 2 months, and he has to say goodbye to her for now. He confesses that he's been amazed by her for years and checked out all those books before her in hopes that she'd eventually notice him. Being inspired by Seiji's pursuit of knowing what he wants to do in life, she decides that she's going to become a writer. And she decides that she wants to write a story about the Baron Cat and asks for Shiro's permission to use the Baron in her story. Shiro accepts, but only if he's the first one who gets to read it when finished. So she begins writing a love story of the Baron fighting an evil pilot cat to rescue his beloved one. We get some interesting fantasy sequences of the Baron guiding Shizuku through the world she's created in her story. Now, Shizuku finds out that Seiji is back for a bit, so he can attend graduation, and she thinks that she needs to rush the story to completion before he leaves again. She spends many hours writing her story, neglecting her schoolwork, causing her grades to fall to her family's disappointment, and all of this causes a lot of pressure and anxiety on Shizuku. We cut to a kind of sad part where Shiro sees a lost love of his life coming through his door, and he's happy to see her, only to wake up and realize it was only a dream. It's interesting to realize at this moment that the love story he mentioned between the Baron and the cat lady, it's obviously one he made up, and it was based on a lost love story he actually went through. So shortly after that upsetting realization, Shizuku walks through the door and begs him to immediately read the story before Seiji leaves. So Shizuku waits all night for Shiro to read the story. He comes back and says that he really enjoyed the story, but she breaks into tears not believing him, saying that she thinks it's awful, corny, and has too many mistakes. As a struggling artist who tried making their own animated series, I really relate with this. I've had people for years saying that my art is great, but I strongly don't agree. I think my line work is too wobbly and sloppy. I'm terrible with proportions and shapes. My stories feel too rushed and flawed, and I leave too many mistakes. I especially feel inferior when comparing my art to the likes of films like this, Studio Ghibli films. I'll never be as good as them. So yeah, the scene does break my heart every time, because I truly understand what this girl is going through. Shizuku thinks she's not good enough to be with Seiji because she can't make progress in pursuing her career like he can. Shiro tries cheering up Shizuku by admitting that her story does have a few bumps, but it can be overcome by time. He reveals more of the story about the Baron, revealing that he had a loved one in real life that he met in Germany, and her name was Louise, the same name as the cat from the love story. So both found the Baron statue and the Lady Cat companion statue at a cafe, but the Lady Cat statue was out for repairs, and the shopkeep would only sell the Baron statue to Shiro if Louise agreed to hold on to the Lady Cat statue, so they could be reunited someday. Sadly, the two were separated from the events of World War II, and he was never able to find Louise or the Cat Lady statue again. And Shiro thanks Shizuku for her story, for it gave new life to his and the Baron's tragic story. He then pulls out a geode rock with emeralds in it, and he compares her to it, showing how the rock doesn't seem so special at first, but if you look between the gaps and see the pretty emeralds inside. He encourages her to search deeper within herself until she can find her emeralds within her. It's honestly a beautiful metaphor about finding worth within oneself. Shizuku decides that she's not quite ready yet to become a writer, but she's going to finish high school so she can pursue a career and get better at writing. Admittedly, I do think the ending is a little awkward and abrupt, but it does give me a laugh either way. So Seiji appears late at night and wants Shizuku to come with him as he rides his bike with her alongside to the top of the town, showing Shizuku a gorgeous sunrise over the city. He confesses that this is where he goes to be inspired. He awkwardly asks her if they ever see themselves getting married someday, and she says yes, causing Seiji to awkwardly say he loves her, and the credits roll. Again, it's a very rushed and abrupt ending, a common issue of many Studio Ghibli films, but it doesn't take away from how sweet and charming this film is throughout. It's very simple and grounded, with no fancy elements aside from the dream sequences. This easily could have been a live-action film, but I respect that they put all the effort into animating this film. I love the visuals, especially in the antique shop and the dream sequences. The main couple were great. The old man was such a charming and lovable mentor for both Seiji and Shizuku. It's a really good movie for those who love to make art or stories, but have doubts within their talents. It makes me wish I could have Shizuku and Seiji's determination to push on. Yet here I am in my 30s, no luck, I tried and didn't get anywhere. So either way, beautiful laid-back film. Number 5, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Talk about a legendary movie, way ahead of its time. Can you believe this movie turned 40 years old? This is a tricky movie to describe because many will argue over what to call this movie. Some will say it's Miyazaki's and Studio Ghibli's first film, but technically it isn't, for Miyazaki's first movie was actually a film adaptation of the popular anime series Lupin the Third, and this movie was made before the studio became Studio Ghibli officially. However, Studio Ghibli themselves do consider this an official Studio Ghibli film. And this truly is Miyazaki's first original work, because Lupin the Third was not a franchise that Miyazaki made, but Nausicaa was his own creation, based on an original manga series that he himself made. While I never saw it all the way through the first time, I have Cartoon Network's Toonami to thank for introducing me to this film. Does anyone remember back in 2006 when Toonami did the coolest thing ever, yet didn't bother making it an annual thing when they really should have? Month of Miyazaki was a huge event where each Saturday night, Cartoon Network would proudly present 4 of the greatest animated movies from Hayao Miyazaki, including Nausicaa, Castle in the Sky, Spirited Away, and Princess Mononoke. I was very excited to see these. Unfortunately, I missed out on all of them, and the only one I got a chance to see was Spirited Away. These promos did a great job at previewing and praising these films for how good they truly are. I didn't recognize any of these movies except for Spirited Away, but I'll discuss that one later. All I knew was I really wanted to see these movies because they looked fantastic. However, although I didn't get to see it all the way through, I did get a glimpse of Nausicaa, and I thought it looked like a very exciting film, but I was forced to leave with my family that night, so I didn't get to see it all the way through. All I remember was seeing Nausicaa fleeing from a giant burning airship, and boy was it exciting. Many years later, I got more acquainted with Studio Ghibli and bought a few of the Blu-rays during the Disney re-release era, and the one I made sure to get was Nausicaa. Now that I've seen the film, what are my thoughts? Honestly, when I first saw it, I was very amazed by the visuals and music, but I was totally lost on what was going on. But I watched it a few more times, and by now do I see it for the masterpiece it truly is. First of all, the voice talent in this is fantastic. You got Patrick Stewart, Shia LaBeouf, Uma Thurman, Tress MacNeille, Jeff Bennett, even Jack Skellington himself, Chris Sarandon. Nausicaa herself is a very revolutionary and very underappreciated heroine. Many people seem to praise characters like Princess Jasmine, Pocahontas, Anastasia, or Mulan for being the first strong and independent female characters who can get stuff done. I'm sorry, but not only did Nausicaa beat all of them by nearly a decade, but she's better than them. I'm not kidding when I say Nausicaa is the greatest female hero of all time. Nowadays, many people groan when they see a push for female heroes because it feels so forced and manipulative. They have to dumb down or villainize the men to make the women look more overpowered in comparison. They try portraying them as flawless, preachy heroes, all about like a woman empowerment. It gets kind of annoying. Nausicaa is a very smart and powerful character, but she's not preachy or braggy about it, nor is she perfect. Most movies with female protagonists have to have sexist men either sexually harassing the women or not having faith in the heroine because she's a woman. Despite being the first animated movie to star a female protagonist, no one looks down on Nausicaa for being a woman. We constantly see her people praising their princess, not because of her gender, but because of who she is and what she does. She does have a bit of a stereotypically girly side to her, like how she twirls and laughs when she's happy. However, despite being so skilled and competent at many things, she's not perfect. Her emotions do get the best of her at times. There are too many words to describe Nausicaa. She's beautiful, respects all life, and sees value and beauty in things that others would find scary or deadly, like these giant insects called the Ohm. She's fascinated with nature despite how she's in a post-apocalyptic setting where so much plant life is either dead or toxic. She just wants to find a way to restore nature, and she wants everyone to just live in peace. It's really a shame that Americans did not see the appeal of this movie back in the 1980s. They originally tried localizing this film as something called Warriors of the Wind. It's a dub so terrible that Miyazaki nearly lost faith in ever having any of his films be localized again. I tried watching it and oh, it's bad. They cut out like 30 minutes of footage from the film. It's got terrible voice acting. They tried Americanizing a lot of the characters' names, like calling Nausicaa Zandra. Not to mention, they pushed Nausicaa far off in the background on the box art of her own film, trying to treat her like she's a minor character, despite how she's the central heart of the movie. We're not here to talk about that crappy first localization, though. Let's talk about the good one from the early 2000s redub by Disney. The movie opens up with a prologue narrated by the late Tony Jay, who played Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, as he describes how 1,000 years ago, a tragedy called the 7 Days of Fire, led by these giant weaponized organisms, wiped out most of humanity and caused the world to turn to a toxic jungle infested with giant insects called the Ohm. My god, the music during this opening nearly tears me up every time. We cut to our heroine as she flies around on a glider and she lands in the toxic jungle wearing an oxygen mask. She gets excited when she finds a giant shell of these insect creatures called the Ohms. She carves off a lens-shaped piece off of the shell to bring it back as a resource for her people, as she lays down and just watches the spores from the sky falling like snowflakes, and she's amazed that something so pretty is so deadly. Suddenly, she hears a disturbed Ohm rampaging towards her valley. Nausicaa finds her uncle, Lord Yupa, and she ends up saving him from the Ohm, but not by killing the Ohm, as she manages to calm the insect down and guide it back to its forest. So Lord Yupa, voiced by Patrick Stewart, comes back from a trip, and he's happy to see Nausicaa, as he introduces her to a creature he found called a fox squirrel. He tried saving it from the Ohm, thinking it was a human baby, only to find out it was a creature, and that provoked the Ohm, which was the reason why it was chasing him in the first place. We get a funny yet cute scene that really demonstrates how great of a character Nausicaa is. She sees that the fox squirrel is very scared and snarly, and she tries showing Yupa that there's nothing to be afraid of with it, and the creature bites into Nausicaa's finger. She grunts for a little bit, but she quickly calms herself down, and then she repeats, "See? Nothing to fear," and the creature calms down and starts licking her wound, as Nausicaa giggles and laughs over the creature and decides to keep him, and she names him Tato. We learn that Nausicaa's father is bedridden from breathing in the toxins from the jungle. An old lady named Obaba brings up a prophecy that only she still believes in, about how a blue-robed man will someday ride across a golden field and save everyone. Now, she's basically Grandma Tala from Moana, except she sounds like Grandma Gertie from Hey Arnold, and she doesn't die. A giant aircraft from another kingdom called the Tomikians fly dangerously close to the valley. Nausicaa flies up there to try saving them, but they crash. A captive princess named Lestel of Pegite falls out of the plane, and Nausicaa tries saving her, but the princess begins dying as she pleads Nausicaa to burn whatever's on the aircraft cargo. The cargo was the embryo of one of the giant weapons that destroyed the world 1,000 years ago. In a tragic scene, the Tomikians invade and head for the king's room. As Nausicaa chases after them, she's horrified to find out they killed her bedridden father. She snaps and begins attacking the men. She even kills some of them. But Yuba steps in and takes a stab from her sword to intervene in order to prevent more deaths from happening. Nausicaa is left horrified over what she just did. The Tomikian ruler, Kushana, voiced by Uma Thurman, is going to mature the bioweapon embryo so she can use it to burn down the toxic jungle, but Obaba tries warning her that many have tried and all it does is anger the Ohm to stampede and destroy other towns. The Tomikians declare that they're going to return to their recently dethroned Pegite with the bioweapon along with 5 hostages, including Princess Nausicaa. In a rather interesting scene, Yupa looks for Nausicaa and finds her in a secret room full of toxic plants and water. We see a worn-out Nausicaa resting in there without an oxygen mask. And when I first saw that, I thought, oh my god, is she trying to kill herself over what happened to her dad? But she reveals that the plants in the room aren't toxic. The plants were only toxic because the soil in the jungles were contaminated. she learned that the plants can be restored with water. She built the secret room in hopes that one of the plants could have a cure to save her father, but she gives up on it now because it's too late. She hugs Yupa with tears in her eyes and confesses that she's scared of herself because she never knew she could have the urge to kill, and she just wants the killing to stop. Now, this is what I mean about her being such a great character. She's a character who's all about making peace, but after that one moment where she loses control of herself, she realizes the horror of her ways, and she doesn't want it to happen again. She's terrified of herself, and I can really relate with this, because I admittedly have a temper, and, I'm sometimes terrified of myself, and yeah, I love the scene. It's really good, really powerful. The next morning, as Nausicaa and the 5 hostages are taken captive and set off to Pedgite, their ship gets shot at by a Pedgite pilot. Now, this was the part I originally saw back when it was on Toonami back in 2006. Yeah, I'm glad I finally got to see the rest of this film nowadays. So Nausicaa escapes from the burning ship and begs the Pedgite pilot to stop. The pilot briefly sees the image of the dead Pedgite princess as Nausicaa begs him to stop. He gets distracted and ends up getting shot down by the Tomikians, and he crashes in the jungle. The Tomikian ship crash lands in the jungle as Nausicaa, the captives, and Kushana survive. Nausicaa ends up adventuring off alone to see if the Pedgite pilot survived. Now, while I do love this movie, there is one thing that I don't really like about it, and that is during the flashback to Nausicaa's youth. They have a gorgeous background of like these golden backgrounds, these really cool lighting effects. The scenes are almost interesting, but what ruins these scenes for me is the tone-deaf choice of music. While most of the music has beautiful orchestration or synth music that sounds like it's straight from a 16-bit JRPG, these flashback scenes have this cryptic flute music with a little girl loudly singing la 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 over and over, and I think the voice gets very annoying and it feels very out of place for the scenes. There's one scene where young Nausicaa is trying to hide and protect a baby Ohm, but these other men confront her and force her to hand it over so they can kill it, as she cries and begs them not to kill it. I feel like the scene would have been more effective if it had sad piano music or dramatic orchestric strings, but instead, let's have a tone-deaf little girl sing obnoxiously loud over and over. I'm guessing they were trying to convey childhood innocence during these flashbacks, but I'm sorry, the music just kind of ruins these scenes. I wish they were better. I see what they were trying to do with it, just poor song choice. So Nausicaa discovers the Pedgite pilot is still alive, being named Aspel, voiced by Shia LaBeouf, and it's revealed that he is the Pedgite prince, as Nausicaa apologizes for his sister's death. She assures him that she tried to save her, and Aspel assures her that his sister's death was not her fault. We see the two bond a bit after they get sucked into quicksand, but they discover an underground cave filled with clean water and purified plants. Nausicaa and Aspel escape and return to Pedgite, and Nausicaa is horrified to learn that the Pedgites have captured a baby Ohm. They have it pierced and dangling with chains, and they are using it to bait to lure the Ohm to destroy the Tomikians, which will also destroy the Valley of the Wind as well, and it will lead to the Ohms getting wiped out in the process. Nausicaa breaks into tears over hearing such a horrible thing, and she realizes Aspel knew about this plan all along. As the Pedgite try to take Nausicaa away to prevent her from interfering with their plans, Aspel realizes Nausicaa was right and he tries helping her escape, but he gets knocked out by his own men and Nausicaa is locked up. Nausicaa is freed by the Pedgite Queen, also Aspel's mom, and she's voiced by Jodie Benson, the voice of Ariel from The Little Mermaid. She has one of her assistants swap outfits with Nausicaa, so Nausicaa can sneak out and try to stop the destruction. In a very heartbreaking scene, we see Nausicaa get shot as she jumps down to protect the baby Ohm. She breaks into tears and apologizes to the injured baby, begging for its forgiveness. The baby tries heading to the ocean, but Nausicaa begs it not to go in there for it's filled with acid. As she tries pushing the baby back, she gets pushed back and her feet get burned by the acid. She collapses on the ground in tears as the baby crawls next to her and tries comforting her by reaching out with its yellow tentacles as the baby's blood soaks over her pink dress, making it blue. This part tears me up every time. Nausicaa eventually gets back up along with the baby as they stand in front of the stampede of the Ohm, and they try to stop it, but Nausicaa gets rammed by them and dies. The valley cries over the death of their princess, but the Ohm gather around her and use their yellow tentacles to raise her high in the sky, emitting a power that restores her back to life, as they stretch out their tentacles, creating a pathway for her to float on. And Obaba breaks into tears when she realizes the prophecy about the valley savior was true all along. A savior dressed in blue really did come along soaring across a golden field, But the savior wasn't a man like she thought. It turns out it was a woman, their princess. During the credits, we see a bit of humanity being restored. For the first Studio Ghibli film, and for a 40-year-old film, this holds up incredibly well. It's a very powerful and moving and very entertaining film. Its message still holds up true about the importance of preserving nature, and how problems are better solved with compassion and understanding, rather than killing. It may not be my absolute favorite Ghibli film, but I'm not going to deny that Nausicaa is my favorite heroine out of all of these films. In a way, she's Studio Ghibli's Snow White. She's the one that started it all. I think it's a crime that Totoro is Studio Ghibli's official mascot, when that honor really deserves to go to Nausicaa. She should be the face of Studio Ghibli. I find it such a shame that so many boys and girls will grow up knowing characters like Mulan or Wonder Woman, yet barely any of them will probably know who Nausicaa is, and I think she deserves to be more well known. I think everyone could learn from this movie. We need less hateful people like Donald Trump, and we need more loving people like Nausicaa in our lives. Number 4, Howl's Moving Castle. Now this was another one I first saw on Starz, and what a fun time to talk about this one, because the film turns 20 this year, and they're re-releasing the film in theaters starting September 26th, and I found out a neighboring city will be playing this, and I ordered a ticket, so I finally get to see a Studio Ghibli film on the big screen for the first time. I even ordered a Calcifer t-shirt for the occasion. Howl's Moving Castle does seem to get some mixed reception. Either people love it and consider it one of Studio Ghibli's greatest, others were disappointed and confused by it, and some were flat out let down because it's based off a book, and it's not a very faithful adaptation apparently, which may turn a lot of people off. Yeah, Ghibli seems to get that a lot from adaptations not matching the book's original story. Tales from Earthsea, anyone? I will admit some elements of this are confusing and questionable, but the overall product is beautiful. We got some very lovable characters, including one of the most quotable ones being in the form of Calcifer, voiced brilliantly by Billy Crystal, who many of you will recognize as Mike Wazowski from Monsters Incorporated. Anytime this film is brought up, I always hear someone quoting,
"May all your bacon burn."
And like I said earlier, he is one of the most marketable characters from Studio Ghibli, popping up across multiple items at the official Studio Ghibli store in Japan. The movie opens up with a giant moving contraption known as Howl's Moving Castle. First of all, the design for this thing is insane, and to think it was all hand-drawn animated. No CGI whatsoever. And this movie even has CGI elements to it, but none of it was used for the castle itself. That is very impressive. We open with a hat shop girl named Sophie who overhears all these girls gushing over hearing and seeing Howl's Moving Castle. Some of the girls gush over Howl, while others tell stories on how Howl is a dark wizard who kidnaps pretty girls and eats their hearts. And Sophie doesn't believe Howl would ever take her because she doesn't consider herself pretty. As she goes outside for a bit, she gets sexually harassed by 2 men when we are introduced to Howl, voiced by the Dark Knight himself, Christian Bale, as he swoops in to save Sophie, saying that he's been looking everywhere for her. He uses his powers to soar them over the city as he tries guiding Sophie to feel like she's walking on air. Howl then returns her safely to the ground and leaves, leaving Sophie to wonder if Howl really is a nice guy or if he really didn't consider her pretty, which is why he didn't kidnap her. As Sophie returns back to the hat shop, she finds an intruder in the form of the Witch of the Waste, who is obsessed with wanting Howl, and she is jealous that Howl showed interest in Sophie. The witch casts Sophie with a curse that turns her into a withered old lady. She feels ashamed of her appearance as Sophie runs away from her hat shop and tries finding a new home. She meets a magical scarecrow named Turniphead, who leads her to Howl's castle. Sophie settles inside the castle where she meets the best character in the film, Calcifer.
Are you Howl?
No, I'm an extremely powerful fire demon named Calcifer.
Calcifer sees himself as a mighty and fearsome fire demon, but he's just a cute little fireball. Calcifer reveals how he's what makes the castle move. He tries shooing Sophie away before his master Howl finds out. We also meet Howl's wizard apprentice, Markle, voiced by a very young Josh Hutcherson, which many may recognize as the main character from Birds of Terabithia or the star of Five Nights at Freddy's the movie. We see how Markle uses a cloak that turns him into an old man, as he uses his disguise to use a magic dial that opens these portals to different doors across the world, so he can sell spells to people who knock on the door. I just love the world and creativity of this film. It really wowed and amazed my younger teenage self. In the funniest scene of the movie, Sophie begins using Calcifer as a source to cook breakfast as she puts a frying pan over him. And here comes the quotable line that everyone who's seen this movie loves.
May all your bacon burn.
So Hal comes in and he doesn't seem to mind that this random old lady just barged in and started making breakfast, and he even joins in on helping her with the cooking. While it's never really discussed, it's safe to assume that Hal was able to sense that this old lady was Sophie all along. He just never bothered questioning it or pointing it out, and I mean, he is familiar with magic after all, so it doesn't really surprise me that he was able to figure that out on his own. Sophie offers to clean the place in exchange for a place to stay. Meanwhile, there's a war going on between different kingdoms, and Hal is summoned by the king to use his magic to fight off the enemies. Hal wants nothing to do with the war, and he wants Sophie to go in his place, pretending to be his mother so she can pass off an excuse on why Hal can't make it. So Hal promises that he'll be there with her in disguise. And so Sophie finds a silly-looking dog who she becomes convinced is Hal's disguise. Admittedly, the following part of the movie is the only part of this movie I really don't like. So the Witch of the Waste is summoned to meet the king as well. And we get this long, uncomfortable scene of the two old ladies struggling to climb the steps. Now, I normally appreciate the dedication of Ghibli's craft, how they put so much time into animating every single step of the characters' journeys. But this is a scene where I really wish there was a time skip. It's not enough to ruin the movie, but it is enough for me to want to skip this scene every time. As they finally make it to the top, the witch rushes over to rest on a chair as Sophie goes forward to speak with the king. A strange spell occurs on the witch. Sophie doesn't find the king, but she finds his grand sorceress Solomon, voiced by Blythe Danner, who played Mrs. Burns in the Meet the Parents trilogy. She reveals that the dog that was accompanying Sophie is actually her own dog, who she used to spy on people. And Sophie is surprised to realize that the dog wasn't Hal, and so she begins wondering where is Hal. Solomon reveals that she punished the Witch of the Waste by removing all of her magic, reducing the witch to her true age and appearance. With the witch's powers gone, we occasionally get moments where Sophie seems to revert back to her younger age, but it's supposedly done whenever she gains confidence in herself. But whenever she's confronted with self-doubt or she starts thinking like she's not very pretty or anything, she seems to revert back to an old lady. So it's an interesting little detail. It's never really explained, but it's something that a lot of people can pick up on if they're paying attention. So Hal arrives disguised as the king as he tries calling off the war, only for the real king to show up, exposing Hal's phony disguise. I gotta admit, this scene gave me a good laugh when I first saw it, because at first you're thinking that the first king was the real deal, and I figured the silly sounding one that came after was actually Hal's disguise. But then as soon as the silly king flees, you see how Solomon says, "Hello, Hal." And so, yeah, that was a pretty good reveal. It was very subversive. So Solomon traps Hal with a spell that nearly fully transforms him into a giant bird-like monster, which he wants to use to fight in the war. But Sophie is able to snap him out of it so he can fly him out of there back to the castle. Sophie learns that Calcifer is a life force for both the castle and even Hal, and that if Hal keeps using his bird form to fight in the war, it may lead to him losing his humanity forever. Hal senses danger from the war coming after him. He adds new portals to the castle to lead his friends to a safer life as he heads off to fight more in the war. An enemy aircraft discovers the castle and tries bombing it. Sophie takes Calcifer out of the castle, causing the castle to begin collapsing. The witch becomes obsessed upon realizing that Calcifer is Hal's heart, and she tries grabbing him. Sophie panics and splashes water on her, only to accidentally douse Calcifer, as the castle collapses with barely any parts moving, and Sophie is sent falling down a deep chasm away from everyone else. Sophie breaks into tears, fearing that she killed Calcifer and Hal. A ring that Hal gave her earlier begins glowing, and it leads her to the magic door of Hal's castle, leading into the past where she sees a younger Hal catching a falling star, which happened to be Calcifer. Calcifer gives Hal his heart, and Sophie begins sinking back into reality, and before that happens, she shouts to Hal that her name is Sophie, and she knows how to save him, and she begs Hal to look for her in the future. Now this flashback really adds more to the meaning of Hal's introduction. When he first told Sophie that he was looking everywhere for her, boy did he mean it. Everywhere for many years, and until he finally found the woman he met from his childhood. Sophie returns to the present and finds Hal in a more lifeless state as he's stuck in his bird form. She turns to the Witch of the Waste and begs her to return Hal's heart. The witch ends up giving in, and Sophie places Calcifer into Hal's chest, returning Hal's heart, and freeing Calcifer for being cursed to move the castle. However, this causes what's left of the castle to end up hurling towards a cliff while everyone is still on it. Turnip Head jumps in front of it and uses his wooden pole to slow down the fall, saving everyone in the process. Sophie kisses Turnip Head for saving them, causing him to turn human. It's revealed that Turnip Head was actually a prince from one of the kingdoms at war. He was cursed into a scarecrow so his kingdom could get rid of him and fight in the war, or start a war basically. And so Turnip Head reveals his curse could only be broken by true love, but he realizes that Sophie really loves Hal, and so he accepts his loss and heads back to the kingdom to stop the war. Calcifer realizes he really likes Sophie, Hal, and the others, and he decides that he'll stay to voluntarily revive Hal's moving castle. Solomon was able to spy on everyone through a crystal ball, and she decides that it is time to end this war as well, as we see the characters happily fly away on Hal's new flying castle. Now, this movie is a lot to take in. The plot may not be the smoothest, it may not be the easiest to follow, not everything is explained, the ending might feel a bit rushed for some, but dang it, this is still a very fun and imaginative movie with great characters, great voice acting, beautiful imagery, and gorgeous music. To me, this is kind of like the Beauty and the Beast of Studio Ghibli, except it stars a girl who doesn't see herself as a beauty, and the Beast himself is a wizard with a bird form. It might not be everyone's number one favorite Studio Ghibli film, but it's still a pretty dang good one. Number 3, Castle in the Sky. While Nausicaa is technically the first Studio Ghibli film, this is officially the first Studio Ghibli film, being the first one made after the studio came up with their official name. If I were to recommend any Studio Ghibli film to be the first one for anyone to watch, it would have to be Castle in the Sky. It's one of the most traditional fairy tale-like stories that ever come from the studio, and it's a very damn good one, with 2 of the most charming child protagonists I've ever seen in a movie. Castle in the Sky is the easiest film from Studio Ghibli to follow, while still containing many mystical and unexplained charms. The movie opens up with a giant aircraft where a girl named Sheeta tries to escape from a deranged man named Muska, voiced by Mark Hamill, the Joker himself. However, a lady pirate named Dola and her comical bumbling sons try capturing Sheeta to get a magic crystal necklace she wears. Sheeta slips and falls from the sky as we hear the most beautiful melody I've ever heard during the opening credits of any film. Seriously, Joe Hisaishi, he deserves so much more credit than he gets for his music. I honestly think he's the greatest composer ever. Schools need to quit teaching students about Mozart or Beethoven and study this man's music instead. As Sheeta keeps falling, a power emits from her crystal, causing her to fall safely and slowly to the ground. Back on the surface, we're introduced to an orphan boy in a mining town named Patsu, as he catches Sheeta as he sees her falling from the sky. One thing I love about the setting is how friendly everyone is. Patsu's boss and his boss's wife treat Patsu like he's their own son, and all the other workers see Patsu as a valued hard worker and a good person. If this were any other movie, the kid would likely be a klutz misfit that the whole town can't stand. It's honestly refreshing to see such a wholesome setting. The next morning, we see Patsu and Sheeta spend time with each other, and like I said, they are some of the most charming child characters I've ever seen. Never once in this movie do they have a big disagreement or misunderstanding that drags the plot down. They just enjoy each other's company, and they're definitely the kind of characters that you could see getting married someday in the future. Patsu shows Sheeta a picture of a floating castle called Laputa. Patsu says that no one seems to believe his dad really saw such a place, but Patsu is determined that someday he'll find it. Dola and her sons invade the town looking for Sheeta's crystal. I just love the part where Patsu's boss tells the kids to sneak out while he takes care of it. We get this comical fistfight with him and one of Dola's sons. We get an action-packed chase scene with a lot of gunfire and explosions. The 2 kids end up falling in a mine shaft where they run into Patsu's Uncle Palm, who shows the 2 some mineral deposits that have glowing gems inside, and they're apparently weaker versions of the same type of crystal inside Sheeta's necklace. He warns the 2 about the powers of these crystals and how they shouldn't be used recklessly. Although this isn't a major scene or anything, I still think it's a very memorable break away from all the action. Patsu and Sheeta get more cute interactions as they just take a lunch break, and Uncle Palm was a very cool guy, although he is kind of senile. Sheeta reveals that Laputa is real, and she has a secret name tied to its existence. The 2 kids get captured by the military who are working with Muska, and Muska shows Sheeta a fallen robot soldier with an insignia matching Sheeta's crystal, and he reveals how she's the princess of Laputa. We get a heartbreaking scene where Muska will set Patsu free only if Sheeta guides the army to Laputa. Sheeta is forced to tell Patsu to forget all about finding Laputa and to just go home, and Muska gives Patsu 3 coins as a pity prize. We see Patsu is so heartbroken from losing his friend that he rushes home. I love the little detail where he trips and he is so angry that he nearly throws the coins he was given, but he doesn't. It says a lot without spelling it out. It gives the impression that he doesn't want the money, he just wants his friend back, but he doesn't throw it away because he knows he's poor and he needs it. It's a tragic little detail, but I love that attention. As Patsu enters his house in defeat, he's ambushed by Dola and her sons. Dola shames Patsu for just letting Sheeta go, and Patsu begs Dola to help him get back and rescue her. Dola agrees, but only because she wants that crystal. What I love about Dola is how she starts off as a villain, but over the course of the film, she really grows to care for these kids, and she really softens up and becomes friends with them. A lot of action happens as the two kids reunite, but Sheeta loses the crystal. However, its power emits a light pointing to the location of Laputa, as Dola agrees to take the kids to Laputa, but only if they join her crew in the process. We get some odd but hilarious scenes with them being a part of the crew. Admittedly, the scene where Dola's sons are attracted to Sheeta and want to help her in the kitchen, it is very odd and kind of uncomfortable, but it's still very funny. It could be tallied up that they're just very stupid and they don't get many interactions with the outside world, especially considering who their mother is. You know, they're just big mama's boys, so you can't really blame them for not knowing any better. It's still a pretty funny scene, though.
I'm in love with you!
We get a very wholesome scene between the two kids on top of the crow's nest at night, as Dola eavesdrops in on their conversation, and she's very charmed by their heart-to-heart. Like I said before, the characters in this film are just very charming. However, a storm occurs and the gang gets separated. Luckily, the storm leads Patsu and Sheeta straight to Laputa, and they're surprised to see it contains a lot of nature, but it also contains many dead robots and graves for those robots. And we see one of the lone robots still mourning the loss of the other robots as he keeps bringing flowers to the grave. And one of the most iconic images in this film is the one where the friendly robot hands Sheeta a flower to add to the grave. Both the imagery and music during the scene, it's like a needle straight to the heart. Just a beautiful scene. However, the military and Muska make it, and Muska captures Sheeta, and Patsu adventures up to save her. Muska reveals he is also an heir to Laputa, and reveals that Laputa contains massive weapons, enough to destroy the planet, which he wishes to do because he sees himself as a higher being than the others. He demonstrates the weapon's power by destroying the military's airship. There's surprisingly a lot of implied death in this otherwise family-friendly movie. We get some very suspenseful and terrifying scenes of Muska chasing and cornering Sheeta with a gun. He even shoots off her pigtails and threatens to shoot her ears off next. Patsu finally makes it to the top, and as a last resort, Sheeta teaches Patsu a spell of destruction in order to destroy the castle before Muska can use its weapons any further to destroy anything else. The spell blinds Muska and he falls to his death as the castle collapses. Patsu and Sheeta manage to escape as they look back and see the collapsing Laputa fading from the distance. As the capsule collapses, it unearths a giant floating tree with roots underneath. And we see the lone robot is still alive as he continues to add more flowers to the grave, along with looking after all the plant life and animals there. I just love how this scene really emits the feeling of having to leave a place you really don't want to see go. They easily could have just had the characters look back once and then ignore it, but no, it shows that they're really sad to see it go as they keep staring as it keeps fading away until it's entirely out of sight. The kids find out Dola and the gang survived, and they part ways. Dola and her sons fly off and wave goodbye as Patsu and Sheeta ride back home. And that was Castle in the Sky. Man, this is one of the most fun and charming Studio Ghibli films. Hard to believe it's one of their first works. It holds up incredibly well. If anyone is interested in diving into the world of Studio Ghibli films, you can't go wrong with watching Castle in the Sky first. Part of me really wishes I could say this is my number one favorite Ghibli film, but there's two others that I find more impactful and more thought-provoking. Number 2. Okay, I know some people may be upset with me for not calling this number 1, but Spirited Away. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a fantastic movie. It was the one that got me into wanting to watch the rest of the studio's work. Back in the early 2000s, before my family and I went on a vacation to Disney World, I remembered seeing a preview of this movie air on TV, and I was shocked to see this was being advertised as a Disney film. It looked very incredible. I loved the animation on it. Later at the Rainforest Cafe at Animal Planet, a TV with a talk show was on, and I remembered the two anchors took a moment to advertise this movie, and they discussed how it's a must-watch movie. They were praising its animation and music, and I was very intrigued. by this movie, and I just knew though that my parents would have no interest in seeing something from Japan. I don't know, my parents just never really cared for anime, and I don't even care much for anime, but I love Studio Ghibli. So, cut to 2006 when Month of Miyazaki premiered, and I made sure to tune in and watch Spirited Away, and I was blown away. The movie was beautiful, it was terrifying, just amazing. For the longest time, I considered this the greatest Studio Ghibli film. I really wanted to buy the movie, but I just couldn't find a dang DVD of it anywhere in my state. It wasn't until the first Blu-ray edition in the 2010s from Disney where I finally got to buy and own this movie. This movie was the one that made me realize I want to make animation for a living someday. Sadly, that just did not work out. I just never got any better at animation and can't afford the schooling for it. And even if I did, I feel like I would struggle with it. I was just never very good at learning. So the best way to describe this movie is that it's Japan's version of Alice in Wonderland, except a bit darker and scarier at times, and it has more of a plot. The movie opens up with a girl named Chihiro who shares the same voice as Lilo from Lilo and Stitch. She's bummed because she has to move to a new home and school. Her parents get lost and decide to check out what they believe to be an abandoned amusement park, but it's actually a giant bathhouse for worn-out spirits. The parents come across a bunch of food and start helping themselves do it, but Chihiro wants nothing to do with it and she just wants to go. She wanders off and meets a boy named Haku, voiced by Jason Marsden, who Disney fans may recognize as Max from a Goofy movie. Haku warns Chihiro that she shouldn't be here and he tells her to leave. The movie takes a pretty scary turn as these dark, creepy shadow spirits arrive. Chihiro tries telling her parents to leave, but she's horrified to find that her parents have been turned into pigs. I remember this scene giving me such chills when I first saw it. Everything from the imagery and music is just spine-chilling. Chihiro sees more spirits arrive and they enter the bathhouse. Chihiro starts fading away, but Haku arrives and assures her that he's a friend. He feeds her berries that prevent her from fading away into a spirit form. So Haku wants Chihiro to follow his advice if she ever wants to see her parents again. He tells her to seek out the boiler man named Kamaji and ask him for a job, and no matter what, he tells her to not refuse. She finds Kamaji, who honestly reminds me of Gerald Robotnik from Sonic Adventure 2. He's voiced by the late David Ogden Stiers, who voiced Cogsworth in Beauty and the Beast. The good one, that is. We get a funny scene with Chihiro trying to help these little suit creatures deliver coal into the boiler. One of the suit creatures accidentally gets crushed by the coal, so Chihiro tries helping him out by carrying it for him, causing all the suit creatures to intentionally drop the coal on themselves in hopes of Chihiro doing all their work for them. Kamaji says that he doesn't need any more help because he has all the workers he needs down there, and he has one of his working ladies named Lin to take Chihiro to the boss Yubaba. And it's worth knowing that Lin is the voice of Megara from Hercules. I love how when Lin asks who Chihiro is, Kamaji just casually says that she's his granddaughter. It's just so funny to me, like how he went from seeming very harsh to her, not even giving her a friendly greeting, to just casually saying, "Yep, she's my granddaughter." It's kind of funny. So Chihiro is taken to Yubaba, and she constantly begs for a job. Yubaba refuses to give her a job. Chihiro's shouting is waking up her big baby. And so in order to get the baby back to sleep, Yubaba reluctantly decides to give her a job. She uses a spell that takes away Chihiro's name and replaces it with a name called Sen, which means 1,000. Now this movie does have a deep metaphor about the corruption of toxic work environments, like how bosses don't see their workers as human beings, just numbers. Lin is forced to take in Sen and show her how to clean the bathhouse. We see all the spirits treating Sen terribly for being a human. Lin comes across as not caring for Sen very much early on in the film, but she quickly grows very attached and concerned over her. Sen is confused because she knows his Haku is Yubaba's lackey, and he's been treating her much harsher compared to earlier. Lin tells Sen to stay away from Haku because he can't be trusted. The following morning, Haku wakes up Sen and tells her to meet him in the garden, where he'll take her to see her parents. We see her adventure off when she notices a socially awkward and kind of creepy spirit named No Face. I just can't help but laugh upon learning that he's voiced by the guy who's been voicing Porky Pig since Space Jam.
That's all, folks.
Haku shows Sen her parents and tells her to remember which pigs are the real parents because she'll need to know if she ever wants to go back home with them. We get one of the most emotional scenes in the movie where Haku gives Sen a goodbye letter that Sen received from her friends before she moved. Sen reads the note and remembers that her real name is Chihiro, and she can't believe that she nearly forgot it. Haku explains that it's important for her to remember her name. Yubaba taking away people's names is how she's able to keep control of them. and he expresses how he wishes he could remember his own name. He then gives Chihiro a rice ball, telling her to eat it so she can regain her strength. As Chihiro eats it, she starts tearing up. Now, I just love this scene because it says a lot without spelling it out. You can just imagine a number of reasons for why she's crying during the scene. I mean, it could be because she's scared, because she's lost in a world where all the spirits hate her and want her dead. She's scared of being forced to work for a scary witch. She's scared that she'll never see her parents restored to their old selves and they might never go home. And she's conflicted over whether Haku can really be trusted, since others are telling her that he cannot be trusted. Yet he's the only one showing her kindness and seems to be showing an effort in trying to get her back home. As Sen heads back to the bathhouse, she finds out Haku can turn into a dragon as he flies off. One rainy night, Sen notices No-Face standing outside alone in the rain, and she offers him to come inside and dry off. Sen needs to get certain tokens to get soap for cleaning up a tub, but none of the human-hating spirits are bothering to help her, so No-Face steals some of them and gives them to Sen to thank her for the kindness she showed him earlier. A giant stinky sludge spirit shows up and wants a bath. I always crack up with Sen's reaction to his appearance. It's pretty funny stuff. As Sen tries cleaning him, she notices something stuck in the creature, and Yubaba orders all of her workers to help Sen in pulling it out. It's fun to learn that this was based on a real-life event that happened in Miyazaki's life, where a bunch of people around his town got together to pull out a bunch of junk in a polluted lake, and one of the first items they yanked out was a bicycle, just like in this scene. Suddenly, the stink spirit is purified and revealed to actually be a river spirit. He thanks Sen for her help and gives her some kind of bitter-tasting food that Sen believes may turn her parents back to normal. Meanwhile, the spirit leaves a bunch of gold pieces as thanks for their service. Everyone is happy for Sen for making them so much money. No-Face starts getting corrupted by the greed of the other people and starts making fake gold to bribe the workers into giving him all the food he wants, and he even starts eating some of the workers. I've seen a lot of reviews and dissections of this movie over the years, but there's one thing that I'm surprised no one ever touches upon. One thing I noticed is that, right after he eats the first frog that he tricks, he suddenly starts speaking like the frog, and you also notice how he has more frog-like tendencies, like how he's constantly hunched over with bowed legs, and it is an interesting detail. It's almost like he's copying whatever he eats. It's like he's somehow adapting to their behavior, and it is an interesting detail, and I can't help but be reminded of in Sonic Adventure when you fought Chaos, and he, during his second to last form, after he ate Froggy, how he turned more frog-like, and I'm not sure if that was intentional, but that's what it reminds me of. No-Face is a rather creepy character, but his whole purpose is to show how toxic greed can corrupt people. With being surrounded by so many rude and greedy people, it just really drove him to grow crazy. The next morning, Sen finds Haku getting attacked by paper dolls in his dragon form, and she tries saving him. She finds out the paper dolls were sent by Yubaba's twin sister, Zeniba. She was angry that Haku tried stealing her seal, and she gets back at Yubaba by turning her baby into a mouse, and she turns her harpy into a little bug-like bird. Haku starts acting feral, and Kamaji notices a black magic slug creature, which Chihiro manages to squish. As Haku starts bleeding out, Sen gives him part of the food that the river spirit gave her, causing Haku to calm down and turn back into his human form, but he's in a very weak state. Sen wants to adventure back to Zeniba to return the seal to her and hopefully ask her if she can spare Haku's life. Kamaji gives Sen train tickets to see Zeniba. Before Sen has a chance to depart, Yubaba is outraged over No-Face taking over the place and eating many of the workers, and she forces Sen to deal with him. Here's arguably the scariest and most disturbing scene in the movie, but damn is it exciting. We see No-Face is now a giant blob, and he's rambling on like a madman as he's angrily demanding Sen to take his gold.
Take the gold! Take it!
Sen sacrifices the thing she was saving to restore her parents, and she thinks that No-Face needs it more. So No-Face starts eating it as he starts projectile vomiting all the junk he ate. He gets outraged at Sen and starts violently chasing her down the bathhouse towers. After vomiting out all the junk and spirits he ate, he reverts back to his old timid self. And Sen points out that the bathhouse is what was driving him crazy, and he should be better now. Sen boards the train and takes No-Face with her, if he promises to behave himself. This is honestly my favorite scene in the movie, and I know I'm not alone. Nothing really happens during the scene, but it's such a beautiful break after the most intense scene in the movie. We just see the characters riding the train with very somber music as they look out the window and ride past some beautiful CGI scenery. It shows off a lot of growth within Chihiro, how she went from being a scared, timid child at the beginning to being so determined that she's going to save her friends and parents. Meanwhile, Haku wakes up and confronts Yubaba and demands her to release Sen and her parents. Yubaba realizes she was too caught up with work that she didn't even notice her own baby was missing. Haku reveals that her baby is with Sen and Zeniba. Yubaba says that she'll let Sen and her parents go, but only if she passes a test. Sen arrives at Zeniba's house and is surprised to see Zeniba is nothing like her evil sister. She's very kind and polite. Sen returns the seal and she mentions she squished the black slug that she cast on Haku. Zeniba laughs and reveals that the slug wasn't hers, it was her sister's. Yubaba's slug is what caused Haku to do her bidding, so Sen freed him from her possession when she squished it. Zeniba becomes a mother-like figure for No-Face, as No-Face decides that he wants to live with her. Zeniba, unfortunately, cannot help Sen with restoring her parents, but she makes her a hairband so Sen will never forget the friend she's made in the spirit world. Haku appears in his dragon form to take Sen back to the bathhouse, as Sen says goodbye to Zeniba. The two fly back to the bathhouse, and Sen is reminded of when she was a little girl. She fell in a river and nearly drowned until the current pushed her back to the surface, saving her life. She realizes that Haku was the spirit of that river, and she says that his name is the Kohaku River. Suddenly, Haku's cursed dragon form shatters, breaking Haku from Yubaba's control, and we get a beautiful scene as Haku realizes that he remembers his name, and the two fly back to the bathhouse. Sen takes the final test, which involves guessing which pigs are her parents. Sen reveals that none of them are her parents, and she is correct. Haku takes Chihiro back to the entrance and tells her that her parents are waiting for her on the other side, and he tells her not to look back until she reaches the other side. Chihiro is surprised to see that her parents don't remember a thing from what just happened, and they leave for their new home. Now, I've heard some people question if this movie was all a dream, but if you pay close attention, it wasn't, since during the last shot, we see Chihiro, before she gets back in the car, we see that she's wearing the hairband that Zeniba made for her. She was not wearing that purple hairband earlier in the movie, so that little detail lets the audience know that all the events in this film actually happened. And that was Spirited Away. It is definitely one of the studio's most important films, with some of the greatest visuals the studio has ever produced. You know the movie was great when it was the first anime to ever win an Academy Award. For the longest time, it was the only anime to receive an Oscar until 2023's The Boy and the Heron. For the longest time, I felt for sure that this was my favorite Studio Ghibli film, until I heard someone mention that they thought there was another film that was even better, and that other film is the last film we're going to discuss. Number 1, Princess Mononoke. I was shocked to hear people claim that there is a movie that was even better than Spirited Away, and it was oddly the one that released a few years before Spirited Away. This was originally supposed to be Miyazaki's last movie ever made, back in 1997, but we all know by now that his last films are never really his last films. Mononoke was the highest grossing film in Japan until Titanic released. Unlike most Studio Ghibli films that are geared towards family audiences, this one has a PG-13 rating and contains the most violent and bloody imagery to ever come from a Studio Ghibli film. I went into this thinking, there's no way this is going to be better than Spirited Away, but my god, I was mesmerized throughout, with its stunning animation, powerful and haunting music, decent voice acting, and thought-provoking story. Many people claim that this movie has the best story when it comes to having an environmental message, and I absolutely agree. Every other movie with this message is very cliche and it feels like it's been done before. Films like Ferngully, Pocahontas, and Avatar. The message usually being humans bad, nature good. Princess Mononoke dares to be more complex than that. It shows that both sides have their good and bad qualities, and how important it is to find balance between the two instead of wiping one out over the other. The movie was also clearly a huge inspiration for both The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of a Kingdom. I mean, Link's default outfit is very similar to the hero's outfit. One of the film's greatest threats is a giant demon boar, where it has like this cursed stuff where if you touch it, it hurts you. The first action scene strongly resembles the guardians that surround Hyrule's ruins. Early on, the hero meets up with an old man who guides them on their quest. The Koroks are eerily similar to the Kadama spirits, with both their masks and rattling sounds, and you can even have a wolf fight alongside you. Also in the sequel, Link gets a cursed arm, just like the movie's protagonist. You cannot tell me that Nintendo was not inspired by this movie. The film opens up with a narration by the voice acting legend himself, Keith David, who voiced Goliath from Gargoyles, and Dr. Facilier from The Princess and the Frog. He describes how long ago there was a time where the world was ruled by people and animal gods. But over time, hatred spread between the two, causing demons to rise from the hatred. A giant monster starts attacking a village as our hero Ashitaka, voiced by Billy Crudup, rides his red elk Apul to try and stop the creature's rage from destroying his tribe. The monster turns out to be a giant boar god whose hatred turned him into a demon. First of all, not only is the scene very intense with its very haunting music, but the animation on this thing is insane, with its spider-like movement, glowing red eyes, and the worm-like darkness surrounding it. The fact that most of it was done by hand, and only a little of it was done in CGI, that is just insane. Ashitaka accidentally gets touched by the demon boar before he manages to shoot it to its death with his bow and arrow. The curse ends up giving his arm demon-like strength, but the curse will slowly take over his body and kill him over time. Our hero is banished from his tribe as he heads off to the west in hopes of finding a cure and a way to see with eyes unclouded by hate. Before he leaves, his little sister Kaya, voiced by Tara Strong, gives him a crystal dagger so he'll never forget her. We get some more beautiful music and imagery as he rides off. We get a gruesome scene where he finds some samurai slaughtering people, and Ashitaka steps up to protect the people, only for his arm's curse to kick in, causing him to fire arrows that pierce a man's arm off and even decapitate someone. A monk named Jigo, voiced by Bad Santa himself, Billy Bob Thornton, notices Ashitaka's amazing fighting, and he meets up with him in a nearby town. He manages to help Ashitaka escape from thugs who want to kill Ashitaka for his gold currency. Jigo and Ashitaka settle near a wrecked village, where Jigo gives some insight on how tough life is for everyone around here.
So you say you're under a curse? Well, so what? So's the whole damn world.
Jigo reveals that he knows where Ashitaka is from, but he assures him that he won't tell anyone. He reveals how further west there's a forest where no man dares to go in, for it's guarded by deadly animal gods, and he reveals how there's a forest spirit, and how it's believed that the head of the spirit will grant someone immortality. The Emperor would pay a handsome amount of gold to anyone who can give him that immortality. Ashitaka shows Jigo an iron ball that was found lodged within the boar god, which is what turned him into a demon in the first place. Jigo acts like he doesn't know what it is, but he directs him towards an industrialized town called Irontown, where they dig up iron and use it to make weapons and protect themselves from invaders. Meanwhile, we cut to the leader of Irontown named Lady Eboshi, voiced by Minnie Driver, who played Jane in Tarzan. We also have her right-hand man, Gonza, voiced by Bender himself, John DiMaggio. Eboshi and her men are trying to deliver rice back to their town, but they get attacked by two wolf gods, led by the queen of the wolf gods, Moro, voiced by Gillian Anderson from The X-Files. Eboshi succeeds at shooting Moro, causing iron to get lodged into her as she falls off a cliff. The following morning, Ashitaka finds two injured men of Eboshi's washed up in a river, and he rescues them and wants to return them home. Suddenly, he spots Moro along with the title character, San, Princess Mononoke herself, voiced by Clara Dane. San begins sucking and spitting out the contaminated blood from Moro. As she spots Ashitaka, she tells him to go away as she rides off with the wolves. Ashitaka finds little forest spirits called Kadama, who guide him passageway through their forest to get to Irontown faster. On the way there, Ashitaka gets a glimpse at the legendary forest spirit, being a deer-like god with the face of a human. Ashitaka makes it to Irontown, as the town thanks him for saving and returning the two of their men. Ashitaka spends some time with the men and women there. He learns that the lady workers there used to be brothel slaves, and they were rescued by Lady Eboshi in exchange for working for her at her town, and the women are very grateful and loyal for that. The men start sharing a story on how Eboshi destroyed a forest which angered a giant boar god named Nago, causing Ashitaka to realize the boar god that he was cursed by was the exact same one, and he realizes that Eboshi was responsible for it. He comes to confront Eboshi about his curse and how she's responsible for it, but he learns that despite Eboshi's harsh actions, she's doing everything she does for the sake of protecting her people. She even takes in people sick from leprosy. When the world turned away from the lepers, Eboshi took them in, washed up their wounds, and gave them work so they can live. Now that's what really makes this film really fascinating for many people. They easily could have had Eboshi just be a pure evil woman who just wants to watch the forest burn. She just wants to destroy everything and rule everything, but everything she does is to protect her own people that she cares for, along with scaring off invading samurai and animals that threaten her kingdom, basically. So she brings up that destroying the forest may free Princess Mononoke, for she was taken by the wolves and is under their control. Up next comes what I consider to be the best sequence in the whole film. It just gives me chills every time. So San infiltrates Irontown and fights off many of the men with the intent of killing Eboshi. Ashitaka tries stopping her from hurting anyone, but San is too filled with rage to listen. Upon nearly getting shot to death by Eboshi's men, Ashitaka protects San, but she charges towards Eboshi and the two begin clashing in a sword fight. Ashitaka is fed up with all this hatred as he marches between them and grabs them, preventing them from fighting. His arm starts emitting shadowy tentacles as he tries getting everyone to look at it and realize what hatred really looks like and what it does to people.
Look at it! It's ugly, isn't it? You look at it!
Eboshi gets fed up and tries cutting off Ashitaka's arm, but he stuns her along with San. He announces that he's leaving with the Wolf Princess, but one of Eboshi's women gets outraged at him for hurting Eboshi, and she shoots him. But Ashitaka keeps on moving forward regardless of all the blood he's losing. The guards at the gate beg Ashitaka to not go any further because they are grateful to him for returning those men. But Ashitaka tries opening the gate by himself despite all the blood he's losing. His cursed arm manages to push through the gate open as he returns San to her wolf brothers. Man, this scene was just powerful and intense. Honestly, it was right after this scene where I declared, okay, I'm sorry Spirited Away, I love you, but Princess Mononoke is my favorite Studio Ghibli film now. God, I didn't even watch it all the way through and I already declared this is my favorite movie. So, anyways, San recovers and is outraged at Ashitaka for stopping her from killing Eboshi, and she threatens to kill Ashitaka as he's dying from his bullet wound, but she can't go through with it. We then see an ape tribe slowly telling San to give them Ashitaka so they may eat him and gain his strength. They believe that a human strength will allow them to fight off the humans and get rid of them once and for all. It's worth noting that in this movie, the animals are ruled by animal gods, and when the gods of those animal tribe are dead, the other animals that are following that god basically grow stupid to where they lose their ability to speak. And you can kind of see that with the apes, with the way they're losing their sanity and are talking in a very slow and uneducated manner. The apes insult San by calling her a human, which angers her wolf brothers as they try stepping up for her. San decides to take Ashitaka to the forest spirit to see what the spirit wants to do with him. At night, the forest spirit turns into a giant creature called the Night Walker. We see Jigo and his men disguised in animal skins as they try waiting for their perfect opportunity to hunt down the forest spirit, but they see the boar tribe approaching, led by their new leader Akodo, voiced once again by Keith David. The forest spirit takes some life from some of the plant life in the forest and gives it to Ashitaka to save him from his bullet wound. However, Ashitaka's curse still remains. The next morning, San reveals to Ashitaka that the forest spirit wants him to live, and she reveals how Apul spoke with her and told her all about him and his people. And Ashitaka is still very weak as San tries nursing him back to health by feeding him jerky. The boar tribe approach Moro, and they are outraged to not only see two humans with her, but are even more outraged to learn that the forest spirit spared Ashitaka, yet left their leader Nago to die. Moro tells them that San is her daughter and that Nago wasn't helped because he was afraid to die. She reveals that soon the Iron Lodge in her will kill her too, and she's willing to accept that. Ashitaka tries explaining how it's true that Nago turned into a demon and attacked his home and cursed him. The new leader of the boar tribe named Makoto, a blind white boar, begrudgingly believes his story, but says that he and his tribe are going to risk their lives to destroy the humans once and for all. Back in Irontown, we see how Jigo is working with Eboshi. They made a deal where Jigo would give her men to protect her town, in exchange for the head of the forest spirit so he can give it to the emperor. However, Jigo is a bit of a double-crosser, for he has some of his men trying to take over Irontown while he's accompanying Eboshi to get the forest spirit. Ashitaka wakes up in the middle of the night and has a word with Moro. He tells Moro that she needs to set San free, since she isn't a wolf. Moro is offended. She tells Ashitaka that San's real parents defiled her forest and threw San at her feet as they ran away to save their own lives. So instead of eating San, Moro took in San and raised her as her own daughter. It causes Ashitaka to realize that Eboshi was wrong about what she said about the wolves taking and controlling San. Ashitaka wants to find a way to protect both the humans and the forest, but Moro laughs at him thinking it's such an impossible thing. She warns Ashitaka to leave in the morning or she'll kill him. The following morning, Ashitaka is guided by one of Moro's sons to leave the forest, and he gives the wolf his crystal dagger and asks him to give it to San. Moro decides to head to the pool of the water spirit to await her death. As San decides to help with the boars and fighting off the humans, Ashitaka finds out Irontown is under attack by Jigo's men, but he sees that the town is capable of handling the invasion for the time being. One of the workers named Toki, voiced by Jada Pinkett Smith, begs Ashitaka to bring Eboshi back alive as Ashitaka heads off to find Eboshi. Along the way, he finds a bunch of wreckage as the men reveal that Jigo's men are using Eboshi and they plant a bunch of mines and bombs to attack the boars, which managed to wipe out a bunch of Eboshi's men as well. All the boars were wiped out except for Akodo, who is heavily injured and bleeding like crazy, along with one of the wolf brothers, as San tries guiding Akodo to safety. However, Jigo's men disguise themselves as Akodo's fallen warriors, tricking Akodo into thinking his army came back from the dead, as he blindly stampedes off with more rage. However, a demon rises out of him and he becomes a demon himself, also trapping San. Ashitaka rescues the other wolf brother, who is trapped under the pile of boar corpses, and they get informed by the other wolf that San is in trouble, as Ashitaka and the wolf head off to try to save San. They meet up with San along with Akodo and Moro at the pool of the forest spirit. As they try freeing San from Akodo, suddenly the forest spirit appears and frees Akodo from his demonic curse by taking away his life. This is both a haunting yet beautiful scene, mainly because of the music. Moro also collapses, supposedly dead as well. As the forest spirit begins transforming into the Nightwalker, Eboshi shoots off the head of the forest spirit as Jigo makes off with it. The Nightwalker begins transforming into a black ooze that kills whatever it touches, and it starts spreading across the land. Admittedly, this next part kind of confuses me, for we see a decapitated Moro lunge at Eboshi and bite her arm off. I get that it's a callback to an earlier scene where Eboshi mentioned how even without a head, a wolf can still bite, but since when did Moro lose her head? The last we saw her, she just collapsed, her full body intact, but did the black goo from the forest spirit eat up her body or something? I wish they showed this detail. Either way, rest in peace, Moro. San is outraged at Eboshi for killing the forest spirit, and she's mad at Ashitaka for helping her. He tries begging her to help him with trying to return the forest spirit's head back to the Nightwalker.
Never! I hate all of you humans!
Ashitaka says, yes, I'm a human, but so are you. She's in denial and tries stabbing him with the crystal dagger, but he's unfazed and he hugs her, telling her that he's sorry and he tried preventing all of this from happening. San ends up joining Ashitaka and trying to recover the head. They end up having to fight Jigo until he gives in. One detail I love about this scene is how Ashitaka tells Jigo that the head must be returned by human hands, as we see San join in and giving the head back, implying that San finally accepts the fact that she is indeed a human and not a wolf. The Nightwalker accepts its head back and turns into a big gust of wind that destroys Irontown, and he vanishes. After a bit of a pause, beautiful music kicks in as we see plant life growing out of Irontown's ruins, causing all the townspeople to stare in amazement. Ashitaka shows San that all the plant life is returning, and San points out how the forest spirit is gone. But Ashitaka assures her that he's always with them, and he's telling them that they must continue living, as we see that Ashitaka's curse is fading away slowly. San confesses that she loves Ashitaka, but she can never forgive the humans for what they did, and so she's going back to the forest. Ashitaka says that he'll stay in Irontown and help them rebuild, but he promises to make time to make sure to visit her every once in a while, as the two make a bittersweet farewell. If this were any other movie, it likely would have ended with the two leads getting romantically together, but no, this movie does point out that it wouldn't make sense. Too much damage was done, and it would feel forced to San to just forgive the humans just like that. It's a sad but harsh truth that sometimes peace is better kept by keeping a distance instead of confronting each other. We cut to Lady Eboshi being thankful that San and Ashitaka risked their lives to save everyone. She wishes to thank Ashitaka, and she promises that they'll rebuild Irontown, but this time they'll do it right without causing more harm. And that was Princess Mononoke. Damn, what an intense, haunting, yet beautiful environmental film. I was hooked across this entire film. Not a single scene bored me. There are a few questions that this film leaves me with, though. The main one that I know a lot of people agree with is, why is it called Princess Mononoke? I really think they should have stuck with the original title they conceived, being The Legend of Ashitaka, since this movie really is his movie. He's the one who wanted to bring peace to both sides. Calling this movie Princess Mononoke makes as little sense as calling the film Lady Eboshi. Both San and Eboshi are clashing opposites of the same coin. It doesn't make sense to name the movie after one side. Instead, they should have named it after the guy who was trying to bridge peace between both sides. Either way, it's a fantastic movie, one of the greatest animated movies I've ever seen. It might not be for everyone, though. Like, people who are squeamish of violence would definitely not like this film. It is very violent, it is very tragic, but it's got meaning in showing how ugly hatred and war really is, and how the best way to live is to find value in both humanity and nature, not one over the other. And that was my list for my favorite Studio Ghibli films. I highly recommend them. Of course, there are other films from the studio, and some of them are pretty decent, but I just didn't find them interesting enough to really talk about. I'll bet a lot of people are mad that I didn't put Totoro in this. Sorry, it's a cute film, but honestly, it's a little too kiddie-ish for my taste. I just, like, maybe if I saw it as a kid, I'd really like it, but to me, it's like, it feels like I'm watching a preschooler show, honestly. So I only wanted to talk about the 10 I really appreciate. So these movies, they just have a very important message of the importance of life itself. And considering how dark my life has been lately, I really needed this reminder more than ever. These movies are beautiful and I still can't get them out of my head. These are movies that I will always see myself coming back to. Thank you so much, Studio Ghibli. Thank you so much for these movies. Even when we see the day where Miyazaki can no longer be with us, I hope the studio can still find a way to keep on living. I really don't want to see the studio go. That's all I have to show for now. Thank you for watching, see you next time, and have a great day.